He walked onto the America's Got Talent stage quietly, almost carefully, like someone who had spent most of his life trying not to take up too much space. His shoes still bearing the faint dust of long delivery routes, his shoulders slightly tense, his eyes scanning the massive hall filled with lights, cameras, and strangers who did not yet know his name. And for a brief moment, it felt as if the noise of the world paused, because standing there was not a celebrity, not a trained performer, but a Filipino delivery worker who had carried food, parcels, and other people's needs for years while quietly carrying a dream of his own. A dream he never believed would bring him to a stage this big, under lights this bright, in front of judges whose reactions could change his life in seconds. He told his story simply, without drama, without exaggeration, explaining how his days began before sunrise, how he rode through traffic and rain, through heat and exhaustion, delivering orders while humming songs to keep himself awake and hopeful, and how music had always been his refuge, something that reminded him of home, of family gatherings, of mornings when the radio played softly while his mother prepared breakfast. And as he spoke, there was no attempt to impress, only honesty, the kind that settles gently into a room and makes people listen, because it is real and unpolished, because it carries the weight of lived experience. When he mentioned that he would sing Lupang Hinirang, the Philippine national anthem, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a mixture of curiosity and surprise, because this was not a typical talent show choice. Not a song meant to show off vocal tricks or high notes, but a song filled with history pride, an emotion, a song that carried the voice of a nation. And as the first note left his lips, steady yet trembling with feeling, it became clear that this performance was not about winning a competition. It was about honoring where he came from, about standing tall for every unseen worker who dreamed quietly while serving others. His voice was not loud in a forceful way, but it was strong, grounded, carrying a depth that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than technique, deeper than training, as if every word was shaped by memory and meaning, and with each line the room grew quieter, the audience leaning in, the judges watching with expressions that slowly shifted from polite interest to genuine focus, because there was something undeniable happening, something that could not be manufactured or rehearsed, something that felt honest in a space, often filled with spectacle. As the song continued, images seemed to form in the minds of those listening. Not on screens, but in hearts. Images of islands of waves touching the shore, of families separated by work yet connected by love, of people who carried their homeland with them wherever they went, and the delivery worker sang with his eyes slightly closed at times, as if he were standing somewhere else, perhaps back on familiar streets, perhaps beside loved ones, perhaps inside a memory that gave him strength. And this connection made the performance feel intimate despite the massive stage. Simon Cowell, known for his sharp critiques and controlled demeanor, sat unusually still, his usual guarded, expression softening as the song unfolded. And it was clear that he was not just listening. He was feeling, his eyes reflecting a kind of quiet respect. Because music like this bypasses judgment and goes straight to the human core, reminding even the most experienced critics why talent matters, why stories matter, why moments like this still have the power to surprise in a world that often feels overexposed. The final note lingered in the air. Not rushed, not forced. And for a heartbeat there was silence, the kind that feels heavy yet sacred, before the audience rose in applause. Not the explosive kind driven by excitement, but the sustained kind driven by appreciation and emotion. And the delivery worker stood there breathing deeply, hands slightly shaking, absorbing the response with a look that mixed disbelief, gratitude, and relief, as if he had finally been heard after years of singing only to himself. The judges spoke one by one, but their words seemed secondary to their expressions, because their faces told the real story, the surprise, the respect, the emotion that comes from witnessing something authentic. And Simon's voice carried a rare warmth as he spoke about courage, about how choosing that song was a risk, about how the performance felt sincere rather than strategic. And as he spoke, the delivery worker nodded. Not because he sought approval, but because he understood that this moment had already given him something invaluable. He spoke later about his family, about sending money home, about how every delivery he made was tied to responsibility and hope, about how singing helped him remember who he was beyond his uniform in this context, deepened the impact of his performance. Because it was no longer just a beautiful song, it was a chapter in a much larger story, one shared by millions who work tirelessly, often invisibly, carrying dreams that rarely get center stage. The audience connected to him not because of perfection, but because of vulnerability, because he stood there without pretense, allowing his voice to carry not only melody but meaning. And in that vulnerability there was strength, the kind that resonates across cultures and languages, reminding everyone that talent is not confined to privilege or opportunity, but often grows quietly in ordinary lives, waiting patiently for a chance to be heard. As the clip spread online, people from around the world shared it. Not just Filipinos, but anyone who had ever worked hard, felt overlooked, or carried pride for their roots. And comments poured in about goosebumps, about tears, about the reminder that national anthems are more than ceremonial songs. They are emotional anchors, and many viewers wrote about their own journeys, their own sacrifices, finding pieces of themselves in the voice of a delivery worker who dared to sing on a global stage. What made the moment unforgettable was not just the singing, but the silence that surrounded it, the absence of gimmicks, the lack of spectacle, the focus on one person, one song, one truth, and in a show built on competition. This performance felt less like a bid for victory and more like a gift, something offered freely, something that reminded everyone watching why they fell in love with music. In the first place, long after the applause faded and the lights dimmed, the impact of that performance remained, living on in replays and shared links in conversations between strangers who felt connected by a few minutes of honesty. And for the delivery worker, life would continue with its responsibilities and challenges, but something had shifted because he had stood proudly, sung bravely, and shown the world that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places, carrying stories that deserve to be heard, remembered, and respected. And as days passed after that audition, the world around him did not magically change overnight. Yet something inside him had already transformed. Because once a person is truly seen, once their voice is acknowledged, not just as sound but as meaning, it leaves a mark that cannot be erased. And he returned to his routine with the same uniform, the same delivery bag, the same early mornings. But now every street felt slightly different. Every stoplight seemed to carry a quiet reminder that his life held more than survival, that his story had reached far beyond those familiar roads. People began to recognize him, sometimes shyly, sometimes with excitement, calling out his name, thanking him for representing something larger than himself, and each interaction reminded him that his performance had touched hearts in ways he never anticipated. Because he had not sung to impress, he had sung to express, and that sincerity had traveled farther than any carefully crafted performance ever could, crossing borders, cultures, and languages with ease. He thought often about the moment before he sang, the breath he took, the brief doubt that whispered inside him, asking whether he truly belonged on that stage. And he realized that doubt was not unique to him. It lived in countless people who worked quietly, who believed their dreams were too small, too impractical, too distant, and by standing there and singing anyway, he had challenged that doubt not just for himself, but for everyone watching, who felt the same hesitation in their own lives. At night, after long shifts, he would replay the performance on his phone, not out of vanity but out of disbelief, watching himself stand under lights that once seemed unreachable, hearing his own voice fill a space designed for stars. And each replay served as a gentle reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. A lesson he carried with him into every aspect of his life. Messages from home arrived constantly. His family expressing pride, neighbors celebrating his courage, old friends reconnecting, reminding him of moments from childhood when he first discovered music, when singing felt natural and joyful, long before life demanded practicality and responsibility, and those messages anchored him, keeping him grounded, reminding him that while the world might now see him differently, he was still the same person shaped by love, struggle, and perseverance. The judges' reactions continued to resonate, particularly Simon Cowell's rare emotional response, because it symbolized something deeper, the breaking of expectations, the recognition that talent does not always arrive polished or packaged, that sometimes it arrives wearing work clothes, carrying exhaustion and singing, with a voice shaped by life rather than training, and that recognition mattered not just to him, but to anyone who had ever felt underestimated. As interviews followed, he spoke carefully, choosing words that reflected gratitude rather than entitlement, emphasizing that his story was not unique, that countless delivery workers, laborers, caregivers, and migrants carried similar dreams, similar pride, similar love for their roots, and he wanted his moment to serve as a mirror, allowing others to see themselves reflected in his journey, rather than placing him on a pedestal he never sought. The song itself, Lupang Hinirang, took on new meaning for many viewers, who revisited its lyrics, its history, its emotional weight, understanding that a national anthem is not confined to ceremonies or formal events, but lives within people who carry their homeland in their hearts, especially when distance and hardship test their connection, and through his voice, that connection felt alive and deeply personal. He often reflected on how close he had come to never auditioning at all, how easily fear, fatigue, or self-doubt could have kept him away. And that realization filled him with a quiet determination to encourage others, to remind them that opportunities rarely announce themselves loudly, that sometimes they arrive softly, requiring faith rather than certainty, and stepping forward in those moments can change the direction of a life as weeks turned into months. The performance continued to circulate, appearing in compilations, reaction videos, and discussions about the most emotional moments in talent show history. And while he appreciated the attention, he remained focused on balance, on honoring his responsibilities while exploring new possibilities, understanding that growth does not require abandoning one's roots, but building upon them thoughtfully. Music became more than a private refuge now. It became a bridge, connecting him to people who shared their own stories of struggle and hope, and he listened carefully, responding with humility, knowing that while his voice had opened doors, listening was just as important as singing. And through those exchanges, he felt part of a larger community, bound by shared experience rather than fame. The simplicity of his audition remained its greatest strength, a reminder that authenticity resonates more deeply than perfection, that audiences crave truth in a world saturated with performance. And his story served as evidence that when someone stands honestly in their identity, honoring where they come from without apology, it creates a powerful connection that cannot be replicated by strategy alone. He never claimed to be the best singer, nor did he seek validation through comparison. Instead, he embraced the idea that his value lay in his perspective, his willingness to share a piece of himself through song, and that acceptance allowed him to move forward with confidence, rooted not in external approval but in self-respect. Looking back, he understood that the stage had not changed him. It had revealed him, amplifying qualities that were already present: resilience, sincerity, pride, and a deep respect for his heritage. And this realization grounded him, preventing the moment from becoming a burden rather than a blessing. For viewers, his journey offered something rare, a reminder that extraordinary moments often emerge from ordinary lives, that greatness is not reserved for those with resources or connections, but is accessible to anyone willing to show up authentically, carrying their story with courage. And his audition became a symbol of that possibility. inspiring countless individuals to reconsider their own potential. Even as new talents appeared and new stories captured attention, his performance retained its emotional weight because it was timeless, rooted in universal themes of identity, sacrifice, and hope, and those themes do not fade with trends or seasons. They remain relevant wherever people strive for dignity and recognition. He continued to sing, sometimes on small stages, sometimes in quiet moments alone, always with the same intention to honor his journey, to stay connected to his roots, and to remember that his voice was not just an instrument, but a vessel for experience carrying stories shaped by work, family, and perseverance. In moments of doubt, he returned mentally to that stage, to the feeling of standing still under bright lights, singing a song that represented his homeland. And he reminded himself that if he could find the courage to do that, he could face whatever challenges lay ahead, because courage, once discovered, becomes a lifelong companion. The legacy of that audition extended beyond views and applause, living on in the quiet decisions people made after watching it to pursue a dream, to embrace their identity, to honor their background rather than hide it. And in that way, his performance became more than entertainment. It became influence, subtle yet profound. As time moved forward, he remained grateful, not just for the opportunity, but for the reminder that his life, like every life, held value and meaning beyond productivity, beyond labels, beyond expectations, and that singing his truth even once had affirmed that understanding in a way nothing else could. Ultimately, his story stood as a testament to the power of authenticity, the strength found in honoring one's roots, and the unexpected beauty that emerges when someone dares to be seen as they truly are. And long after the final note of Lupang Hinirang faded from the AGT stage, its echo continued, carried forward by a delivery worker who proved that sometimes the most powerful journeys begin with a single honest song.